Chapter 50 is the end of Genesis and the end of the story of Joseph. It includes one of the most quoted verses in the Bible, one I have quoted to myself and others hundreds of times. Jacob has died, and Joseph mourns. Losing your father is a major life event, no matter how old you are. As God had promised Jacob, Joseph was there at his death to close his eyes. Not only Joseph and his brothers, but the Egyptians went into a general state of mourning for 70 days. Jacob's body was embalmed the Egyptian way. It is hard to calculate Joseph's stature in Egypt, so great is it. He goes to Pharaoh for permission to bury his father in his homeland of Palestine. Not only does Pharaoh grant permission, he sends a huge retinue of Egyptian officials to accompany Joseph and his family. And Jacob cared very much about where he was buried. And he gets a royal send-off. When the Canaanites saw this group, they said, "This is a grievous mourning of Egyptians." They didn't even attribute it to the children of Israel. They didn't credit it to Jacob's still small family. In 400 years, when Moses leads the Israelites back to the Promised Land, things will look very different. Matthew Henry has a wonderful comment here. Quote, "When we return to our own houses from burying the bodies of our relations, we say, 'We have left them behind.' But if their souls have gone to our Heavenly Father's house, we may say with more reason, 'They have left us behind.'" End quote. When he has finished burying Jacob, Joseph, as he had promised Pharaoh, returns to Egypt. It had been many decades since he had seen his homeland, and no matter how powerful its attraction, Joseph returned to the place of God's calling. And now the great moment of truth has arrived. For 17 years, the brothers have lived in terror of what would happen to them when Jacob was gone. Joseph would have no further reason to spare their lives. So the brothers play the Jacob card. They send word to Joseph. It's interesting, they didn't go themselves, reminding him of their father's edict. "Don't harm us. We know we were miserable siblings, but cut us slack, because the old man told you to." They even invoke Joseph's religious responsibility by referring to the God of their father. It is not as though they had been especially faithful to that God. Yet again, they cast themselves at Joseph's feet and offer themselves as servants. All this made Joseph weep. Why? Because his sorry brothers continued to the end to misread the situation. Again, Joseph is the heroic figure doing the right thing in spite of the evil he has been subjected to. He first reminds them that he is not God, and then utters one of the most famous lines in the Bible. "You meant it for evil, and God meant it for good." I want to pause for a moment and consider the first three words of the second phrase. God meant it. God meant for everything that happened to Joseph to happen. It was God's plan. It was not a mistake that had to be corrected. This whole astonishing story could not have happened without the brothers' evil. It is like Acts 4:28, where Peter says Christ's death and resurrection were part of God's plan, predestined to take place. Once again, we witness God's plans are completely beyond our comprehension. Joseph spoke kindly to them, reassuring them that God's whole purpose in this was to spare their lives, not end them. Joseph reassures them of the promises of God. At some future point, God will descend and then deliver them out of the land. Just like Jacob, Joseph wanted his bones buried back in Canaan. It must have been pretty important to him. According to Hebrews 11:22, he did this by faith. When you see films about the Exodus, remember that Moses, along with everything else he was doing, is carrying Joseph's bones back to the Promised Land. Genesis ends with Joseph's death. His was one of the greatest and most important lives ever lived. I am astonished at how much I've learned studying him and how much his life has influenced mine over the years. I know he has been a great blessing to you as well. May the God of Joseph bless you this day in a mighty way.